Hey guys, it's Pineapple, and today we're going to loop back around to talk about Kai Chisaki, the leader of the 8 Precepts of Death. Overhaul in My Hero Academia has a specific way of looking at things, tainted by how he was raised and how he views society. The anime briefly touched on it, but it seems like a deeper look behind Chisaki's motivations were cut out, leaving some anime fans to wonder a bit why Chisaki really did everything that he did. Why did he think that everyone was diseased? I have a video more specifically talking about a theory of his from the manga that you can check out by clicking on the card up above, but let's talk more about everything we've learned from the manga since then. I have one more video that I could do about Overhaul, and it's an interesting theory, but since we're moving on to the Culture Festival arc, I'm not really sure if you guys want me to move on too. You can also subscribe and hit that notification bell to join the League of Notifications to get notified whenever I upload, and also you can follow me on Twitter at VocalPineapple for all sorts of updates and other tweets. With all of that out of the way, let's get to talking about Kai Chisaki and this disease society after that intro. Hit it! Alright, so why does Chisaki think that quirks are a disease? He says something like this to Mirio right at the end of their fight, but what disease could Mirio and the others possibly be suffering from? Is it just that Chisaki's some kind of crazed lunatic that sees everyone as sick? Well, it goes a little deeper than that. First off, let's explain Kai Chisaki's roots. Kai Chisaki is a young man who stands out with a little bit of a creepy aura. Where is it that that creepy aura comes from though? Well, I've talked about it before, but it mostly comes from his design, and specifically that Plague Doctor mask. This mask was made common during the spread of the Black Death, a plague that wiped out a large part of humanity long ago in the real world. It killed its victims in a disgusting way, usually leaving its victims feeling discomfort and excruciating pain, which eventually led to death. At the time, there were doctors that treated those that had the plague to at least ease their pain and discomfort as they passed, and to try to aid those who they could in the early stages of their sickness. The plague killed off people at such a rapid rate though, that these plague doctors could be seen entering a town or community, and that would let everyone know that the infection had reached their town. Death would soon follow, so the plague doctors would quickly go on to be associated with the death that comes as a result of the Black Death plague. Their clothes definitely didn't help with this creepy association because they wore large crow-like masks and usually wore dark clothing, with some even wearing all black. It made them similar to crows who were usually associated with death, making it like the plague doctors were the harbingers of death themselves. You could see how Overhaul's design being based off of a plague doctor definitely comes into play in his character. He sees the world as a diseased place, and sees heroes as a symptom of that disease. What is the disease in question though? Well, as the man that wants to erase all quirks, of course, Chisaki thinks that quirks themselves are the disease. Chisaki tells Mirio that he's going to heal society and fix diseased people like Mirio. He means that normal people wouldn't put their life on the line for a little girl like Mirio did. They'd depend on the police or someone else. Having quirks has given people the thought that they could be heroes or just change things that they can't. And Overhaul thinks that removing quirks and evening the playing field will get rid of the crazy mind state that creates both heroes and villains alike. He sees people playing hero and playing supervillain as members of a diseased quirk society that he's working to destroy, while also trying to place the Yakuza on top. Now, could one realistically make the argument that quirks might be able to be seen as a disease? Well, the My Villain Academia arc in the manga showed us a lot about how quirks themselves affect the individual people in society, even from a young age. Quirks are something that a large section of the population mysteriously developed. In some universes, power systems themselves just sort of exist without much of a look at how the power system itself can affect society as a whole. With quirks, it's more than just people being born with powers. These powers and their activation play a role in the personalities of people to varying degrees, and in some, a person's quirk itself could lead them towards a dark path or even contribute to their mental instability, leading to further potentially debilitating mental illness and even worse, full-on psychotic breaks. How many people had quirks that could have gone on to do amazing things, but didn't go on to do those amazing things because the very nature of their quirk influenced them to use it in a way that was destructive? In general, quirks and their usage can be tied to mental illness for a few characters, so I'd argue to an extent the influence over someone's mental state and desires that quirks have could probably be considered symptoms of some sort of quirk-born mental illness. Quirks seem to actually significantly influence a person's personality, like with Shigaraki and Toga, all because they were lucky enough to be born with a power. Sure, there were outside circumstances that aided them in their falls, but their quirks being related to blood or destruction seemed to strongly have contributed towards their need to see blood and cause destruction. Of course, people being similar to their quirks is largely due to Horikoshi's design method, and at times, I'm sure a character's design or their quirk might entirely influence the character's personality or vice versa, all because that's a fun thing to do as a writer and it makes sense. Hori takes it deeper though and makes that part of the world. He makes quirks like bullet control make sense, because if you're born in a world with that quirk, how would you even know if you never shot a gun? Well, in My Hero's world, you'd be born with an attraction to toy guns and things of that nature. In this way, Hori bakes their characters and their quirks together, making the power feel more like an aspect of their personality, like a personality quirk. To best look at this, you can even see other quirks of the villains in the series have been reflected in their motivations and their actions. All for One is a quirk that lets him have the power to give and take all of the amazing powers bestowed upon humanity, and that makes him feel like a god who's in charge of everything. He wants everything for himself, and he's the greediest villain ever, just like the name of the quirk dictates. There's Chisaki, whose quirk Overhaul lets him take things apart and put them back together. While Chisaki very much does this with the Yakuza by putting the boss into a coma and taking the Yakuza and building it around himself to try and make it function even better. His obsession over fixing the state of the Yakuza to pay them back for taking him in as an orphan ultimately ended up with him overhauling the group itself. Even Gentle, a much more lighthearted villain on our list, was simply trying to bounce back from the failures that he faced earlier in life. He was trying to go from 0 to 100 to get his name in the book somehow, and that's definitely respectable. There are other minor examples of this, like Bakugo's explosive personality, President Mike's extremely loud mouth, and the list goes on and on. The best example of this though is probably Shigaraki Tomura, who's had a life that really makes you wonder if quirks and the society that depends on heroes really is diseased and flawed after all. Shigaraki, like I'll be repeating time and time again in this video, is only interested in destruction, which is fundamentally what his quirk does. He wants to destroy everything, and he has a quirk that literally destroys everything. It's the most obvious version of this theme by Horikoshi amongst the villains, because Shiggy is the main villain after all. Shigaraki has an itch that develops over the course of his early years, but it only occurs when he's home. It's obvious that the itch is partially due to a massive amount of stress that he feels in regards to his father and his home life, because even his mother says that the itch only happens when he's home, and it gets worse and worse when he panics, cries, or pretty much is involved with his father in any way. On top of this though, the itch tragically is Shigaraki fighting his inner instinct to use his quirk. His instincts are telling him to destroy, although his heart was telling him otherwise. Everything else in his body was pushing him to be more like Nana Shimura, his grandmother, the hero. However, his quirk ultimately manifested, and with that, the itch subsided as Shigaraki unleashed his quirk on his family and used it for the first time. He says the most incredible wave of maddening ecstasy filled him. He was finally fulfilling his quirk's true purpose because his quirk had an effect over his personality, along with other contributing factors like his family and how they treated him. At least that's my theory, and that's how I read it when I was reading the series. This makes me feel like it really is an unlucky thing to have a quirk, and really, how many people in that world have got their appearance or personality change because of a quirk when they would have just been born looking a certain way without it? How many people had to deal with racism because they look different, or they had a strange body for a quirk that isn't even useful to them? And how many people are there out there with painful quirks or uncontrollable ones? We know that there are people that have quirks that they don't want and will go as far as having them transferred to someone else, thanks to All for One's flashback that we got from Deku's vestiges. So what is there for them besides support items and quirk suppressing drugs? Even if you just have a quirk that society deems as being wrong or uncomfortable to witness, like toga or stains, I'm sure you might think of yourself as being unlucky for having been born with something that makes people look at you a certain way just for living your life normally. It's sad to think that most of the villains in the series could have gone in an entirely different direction with their quirks. All for One could be the ultimate solution for people who have quirks that don't fit their bodies, and his quirk could serve as a massive tool of cooperation between all people. He really could have been the symbol of teamwork, helping people and even communities trade quirks between each other, while also making sure that hospitals had healing quirks and people who needed their quirk removed got it removed. Chisaki could use his quirk to heal any one of their sicknesses like cancer, making them healthy again. He could use his quirk for all sorts of other scenarios that don't involve breaking people down, but once again, just like how All for One is truly the opposite of what his quirk could do for good, Chisaki fills the same bill as being a doctor for the population that wants to rid them of quirks, instead of using his quirk to perhaps save them from what ails them on a more personal level. I'd even argue that Shigaraki could have been one of the best rescue heroes that the world has ever seen. Imagine being in a collapsed cave or under a building building that's fallen, and having a hero that could literally decay it all away, leaving just you there for the paramedics and others to find. For this to work properly, Shigaraki would have to learn how to control what his decay spreads to once he touches something, so that instead of just spreading from the walls to the bodies of the victims and killing them by accident, he could just decay the inorganic materials that are holding them down. It might sound like a little bit of a stretch, but with the right training at UA, Shigaraki could have probably mastered doing just this and might have been a hero that got sent out to places affected by natural disasters that caused people to become trapped, like earthquakes and the like. Instead, he lets his quirk destroy everything that it reaches. So yes, we've established that quirks can affect a person's personality and the things that they want to do, but the same goes for outside forces. There's another theory in our universe though, that actually lends evidence towards the thought that quirks might be a disease, and unlike Chisaki's case or the points brought up during My Villain Academia, this theory actually presents an imminent danger to everyone no matter what side they're on. The quirk singularity theory is a theory pioneered by Professor Daruma Ujiko that suggests that quirks are becoming more unstable and powerful as the generations of users go on. It means that as quirks get passed down and mixed, they'll eventually come to a point where they'll be impossible to control, meaning anyone that has a quirk would have an extremely hard time living a normal life.
We'll hear more about this in the anime's upcoming Remedial Classes mini arc of Bakugo, Todoroki, and the children, but even though this theory gets presented to us when there's a bunch of kids around for comic relief and Bakugo is screaming, this is really sort of actually a doomsday theory. That's because it suggests that down the line, quirks will become literally impossible to control, creating utter chaos and leaving people unable to even keep their quirks from activating. This would cause mass destruction, and eventually, with people being unable to keep their quirks from activating or remaining on and out of control, you could see a huge die out amongst the exhausted, and all of that also leads to less time for continuing the human race. When all is said and done, the quirk singularity theory is about extinction. I guess one of the best solutions would be to get rid of quirks. So you see how this kind of brings us full circle here. All of this makes it seem like Chisaki's plan to rid the world of quirks might eventually be the smart one. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, the episode skipped over a section of the manga where Chisaki talks about rats and how they might be responsible for quirks. I have a video specifically on this, detailing the theory that quirks come from rats, and I even raised some questions about Nezu's origins and detail the first appearance of a character that'll become very, very important next season, Destro. So with all this said, what do you think? Do you think quirks are a disease and something that people should eventually do without? And if you do you have any problem with being on the same side as Overhaul on this? If you disagree, let me know why, and let me know how you'd solve the problem of the quirk singularity and save everyone from their own quirks. This is Pineapple. I love you guys. Peace.